Good morning, everybody, and thank you to Chana for setting up this session and all of the Chizuk sessions that she has been doing 6 days a week, I believe, or 5 days a week, Sunday through Thursday, for the last many weeks that we've been having these Chizuk sessions. To Chana and to all those from the that are participating in the OU trip today to go picking. Chana actually is not going to be at the shiur, because she is representing the OU itself as part of the group that the OU advertises going picking oranges today. So she's off to pick oranges. I hope that she enjoys. I hope she gets some good juicy oranges. But most importantly, of course, that we all just continue to help out all those that are in need in any way that we can. Okay. Once again, good morning to all, and it's good to see all of you. In case you were not aware, this is, at least at this point, this is the last week of these Chizuk Zoom sessions at 10:30 a.m. and 5 p.m. The schedule will take on a little bit of a different twist in the ensuing weeks, and of course, you will find all of that information in the Torah tidbits and elsewhere if you search accordingly. It's good to see all of you this morning, and we should meet under better circumstances, of course, than in wartime. And I would like, if I may, to just dedicate today's shiur to all those that have passed away since October 7th, since Simchat Torah, be they hostages, be they chayalim, be they others. I would like to dedicate our shiur to all of them this morning with a tefillah to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that indeed he will continue to see to our long-term protection and our staying power as Am Yisrael be'eretz Yisrael. Okay. This week we are introduced, of course, with Sefer Shemot, Parshat Shemot, to Moshe Rabbeinu. The parasha begins, as we know, with Moshe Rabbeinu's birth, and the parasha continues with Moshe and Aharon feeling dejected and coming to God and saying, "What gives? You sent us to free Bnei Yisrael, Lahotzi Bnei Yisrael," and not only is that not happening, it's making things much, much more difficult than before. We are in a much more dire predicament as Am Yisrael, and my brother Aharon and I, on a very personal level, now the Egyptians and even our own people want to stone us. If that's the case, we're worse off than we were before. So God, kiviyachol, as it were, what gives? What's going on here? And God's response is, and this is the last pasuk of the parasha, is atat yireh, don't worry, you will see, or maybe worry, but you'll see. And then in Parashat Ve'era, we continue with how HaKadosh Baruch Hu intended to implement the atat yireh, the you will see piece of it, with the Eser Makot, of course, culminating in the actual Yetziat Mitzrayim, as we find in Parashat Bishalach. What I would like to do this morning is to take us on a short tour from the moment that HaKadosh Baruch Hu introduces himself to Moshe Rabbeinu throughout Moshe Rabbeinu's time period as a leader of Am Yisrael, or at least up until we have left Mitzrayim. To be sure, this is a short version of a shiur that I've given in the past at the OU Center live in the past, and then I titled it Moshe's Majestic Mateh, and we are going to take a look and survey different sources that discuss Moshe Rabbeinu's Mateh, Moshe Rabbeinu's handheld staff, and see the direction in which the Torah, through its text, is taking us. Let's begin with Moshe Rabbeinu when he comes across the Sinai, when he comes across the burning bush. At some point in that conversation, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to Moshe, "Ma zeh biyadecha?" What is that you are holding in your hand? Of course, HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows the answer. He's simply trying to get Moshe to direct his attention to his answer, which is, Vayomer Moshe said, "It is Mateh, it is my staff." Many, many beautiful midrashim behind the staff, what the sources of that particular Mateh, that we're not going to get into this morning. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as we know, tells Moshe Rabbeinu to take his Mateh, and the Mateh turns into a Nachash. The Mateh turns into a snake, if you will. Then HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Moshe to grab a hold once again of his Mateh, and miraculously it turns back into an inanimate Mateh to an inanimate staff. From inanimity to having animity to going back to being an inanimate object. At that particular juncture, Moshe Rabbeinu's Mateh, which to him was his shepherd's staff, now suddenly also takes on a new dimension, and that is the dimension of HaKadosh Baruch Hu performing miracles. In this particular case, HaKadosh Baruch Hu performed a miracle for Moshe Rabbeinu, perhaps, and I'm saying perhaps because there are different ideas and reasonings suggested here, but perhaps in order to prove to Moshe that it is actually I, God, that is talking to you, that has met you here in the Senebo Er Ba'esh, and not some other unseen individual hiding behind the bush or whatever it may be, not some other entity. It really is me, God. Aside from that, we will then see the transition from HaKadosh Baruch Hu via Moshe's Mateh, performing miracles for Moshe on a personal level, of course, to continue going into the future, performing miracles for Am Yisrael. Moshe Rabbeinu now takes his Mateh. I hesitate to say he was convinced to go after arguing back and forth. And again, we all know the story, but after arguing back and forth with none other than HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself, I don't know that he's necessarily convinced, but he goes. He doesn't really have a choice. Basically, after the give and take, God loses his temper, and he said, "Excuse me, Moshe, I told you to go. I'm the boss. You're not. You answer to me. Now get going." Moshe goes. He takes his Mateh with him. The next time that we find Moshe Rabbeinu using his Mateh is performing these otot, performing these signs before before Am Yisrael. Parenthetically, and not so parenthetically, we are not discussing Aaron's Mateh this morning. We are only referring to Moshe Rabbeinu's Mateh. Therefore, when it comes time for the Esther Makot for the 10 plagues, we will not be discussing at all the Makah of Dam and Svardeya. Those two Makot were performed by Aaron. Instead, we are going to go right to the first Makah, in which we find Moshe Rabbeinu's usage of his Mateh. Because with all the others, up until this particular point that I am about to mention, we don't find Moshe's using his Mateh for these Makot. But the first of the 10 plagues, in which we find Moshe Rabbeinu using his Mateh, is the Mateh of the Matar. It's the Mateh of the Barad, of the hail. And there we are told, Vayet Moshe stretched out et Matehu, his staff, al hashamayim, that same Mateh, towards the sky. And what did HaKadosh Baruch Hu do? Performed, of course, a nes, Vayamter Hashem, Vayamter, like the word Matar, rain. God rained down Barad, hail, al Eretz Mitzrayim. In the next Makah, Arbeh, the locusts, we find the same exact wording. Vayet Moshe et Matehu, Moshe stretched forth his Mateh, his staff, al Eretz Mitzrayim. This time not towards the sky, for the Barad fell from the sky. The Arbeh, the locusts, of course, they just simply swarm from the middle of nowhere, in the air itself or over the land. Therefore, he stretched out his hand, al Eretz Mitzrayim. That is the only difference. And then suddenly, what do we find? The Ruach HaKadim, an eastern wind, nasa et ha'arbeh, carried the Arbeh, blew, as it were, the Arbeh into Eretz Mitzrayim. So we find Moshe Rabbeinu using his Mateh now with a little bit of a twist, a little bit of a transition. First, the staff was nothing but Moshe Rabbeinu's Mateh with its very rich history according to Midrashim. It was his personal staff that he used as a shepherd. Then we find, the added dimension of this Mateh becoming one that is used to perform miracles or to demonstrate to Am Yisrael that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is performing miracles for us, for OUisrael. This Mateh then becomes a symbol of a nes for OUisrael. And that means whenever they see Moshe Rabbeinu's Mateh going forward, and he is about to perform some sort of sign, Bnei Yisrael see that visual sign, and they understand that it is HaKadosh Baruch Hu who is the Po'el. He is the one that is engaged in the proactivity here. Yes, it is Moshe Rabbeinu, but Moshe Rabbeinu is a vehicle, is a medium through which, together with his Mateh, through which HaKadosh Baruch Hu is performing Nisim. And that's going to be important to keep in mind. The next time we find a mention of Moshe Rabbeinu's Mateh is when Bnei Yisrael are at the cusp of Yam Suf. They're about to cross the Red Sea. And there's a transition there as well, which a reader might not pick up on the first time. I think this year, when we come to Parashat Bishalach in just 3.5 weeks, every one of us will suddenly notice this, especially if you're tuning into the Shiur this morning. There we find something very fascinating. Instead of the Torah simply telling us that HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Moshe to take his staff and stretch out his staff, and instead of finding that Moshe Rabbeinu stretched out his staff, we find something very different. And what we find is as follows. There, at the cusp of crossing the sea, HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Moshe as follows: V'ata, you, harem et matecha. Usually the word harem translates into lift. Lift up your mateh, unitei et yadcha, and stretch forth your hand, al hayam, over the sea, uv'ka'ehu, and split it. And Moshe Rabbeinu indeed does that. However, if we take a closer look, at the wording, something different seems to be emerging here. The Torah does not simply say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, or better yet, HaKadosh Baruch Hu does not simply instruct Moshe, Nitei et matecha, stretch out your mateh. If we back up to the previously quoted verses that I quoted just a few moments ago, to contrast, when Moshe Rabbeinu performed the Mateh, the Nes, the miracle of Barad, and again, Arbeh, the Torah makes it very clear, Vayet Moshe stretched out his Mateh, et Matehu, by Yam Suf, as they are about to cross, as the sea is about to split. That's not what we find at all. Instead, we find that HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to him, Harem, lift your Mateh, but Nitei et yadcha, stretch out your hand. It's as if HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself, in his instruction to Moshe, is stressing something else here, some other activity than what Moshe Rabbeinu was engaged in the past. Why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu say to him, Nitei et yadcha, stretch out your hand, after telling him to lift your mateh? And I think it's significant for us to read these words in such a way that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is asking Moshe Rabbeinu to engage in two separate activities. The first is harem et matcha. The second is unitei et yadcha, and stretch forth your hand minus the mateh, without your mateh. And in fact, what's fascinating here is that among the Parshanim, the Kli Yakar says that the word harem here does not even mean lift up. Here it has a different meaning, and he brings proof texts from other sources in the Chumash, where that same root, Reish Vav Mem, to lift, does indeed mean lift up, but in these other sources that he brings for a proof text, Kli Yakar demonstrates that here, harem does not mean simply lift up, simply raise. It means, yes, pick it up, of course, raise it, but cast it aside. We find that also find the same usage by Korach. We find the same usage in a few other locations in the text as well, in a few other passages, where harem means to cast aside. And so the Kli Yakar explains that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is telling Moshe Rabbeinu to do here, in no uncertain terms, is Harem et matcha, not in the way or in the means that we normally think of, but rather take your mateh, yes, lift it up for Bnei Israel to see, lift it for them, but demonstrate for them that you're through with the mateh. You are no longer using the mateh. Cast it aside. They will see you placing the mateh down on the side. And then HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Moshe, according to Kli Yakar, Netei et yadcha, stretch out your hand without that mateh. What's going on here? Remember that we said just a few moments ago that the mateh was a symbol of HaKadosh Baruch Hu performing nisim, performing miracles for Am Yisrael. They would see this mateh and they would understand that God is the one performing for us. We do not have to engage in any of these activities, for it is HaKadosh Baruch Hu that is performing. And that, I believe, and I'm not the first one to suggest this at all, is what was necessary during Bnei Israel's sojourn in Mitzrayim. They were a slave nation. They did not have the wherewithal to take initiative. They were beaten down. They were downtrodden. They understood that in order for them to survive, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, through Moshe and through the representation of this mateh, or together with the visual of this mateh, will be the ones to provide for us. And I, as an Eved, I'm not going to dare to speak up. Because an Eved, a slave that speaks up, will be beaten. He could be killed. I cannot possibly take initiative. And so since Bnei Israel were in this state and frame of mind of being slaves, let's call it a slave mentality, HaKadosh Baruch Hu had no choice but to have Moshe Rabbeinu use his mateh. On the other hand, once HaKadosh Baruch Hu told him to take his mateh and harem and to cast it aside if the Kli Yakar is correct, that then is symbolizing through Moshe to Am Yisrael, to us, that we are now entering a new phase. We are leaving Mitzrayim. As soon as we enter that sea, game over. We will then be on our way to Eretz Canaan. And from this moment on, we, Am Yisrael, must make that transition from being a slave nation, from having a slave mentality when everything is performed for us by God, to taking initiative. From here on in, when we are no longer slaves to Paro and the Mitzrim, we must take initiative in order for us to be able to survive. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, yes, of course, will always be there by our side, just like that mateh was by Moshe Rabbeinu's side. I believe that's part of the visual as well. He is there, literally and figuratively, by our side. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu now no longer acts only through Moshe and his mateh, but he acts through us. In other words, HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to demonstrate that we are in a position, slowly, yes, to leave that slave mentality into a new mentality of a people that are free to worship HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And in order to demonstrate that, we must take initiative in the Midbar, and we must take initiative once we enter Eretz Canaan in order to ensure our survival. And if that particular text and the Perush or the commentary of Kli Yakar is not enough, the fact is that the Torah itself actually makes it quite clear in the text when we come to the Parasha or the Parashiyah, the piece regarding Amalek. Bnei Israel are attacked, as we know, and what do we find? Vayavo Amalek, Amalek came, Vayilachem im Yisrael b'Refidim. Fine. Moshe Rabbeinu then tells Yoshua, you're an army general now, in addition to all of your responsibilities. Choose men, go fight. And what does Moshe Rabbeinu tell Yehoshua? Machar, tomorrow, Anochi nitzav al rosh hagiv'ah, I will be standing on the top of a hill, on a hilltop, umatei ha'elokim biyadi. God's staff, Mateh Elokim, will be in my hand. I'll be holding my Mateh. Yoshua, the Torah tells us, Vayas Yoshua did everything that that Moshe had told him to do. Moshe, together with Aaron v'Chur, Alu Rosh Hagibah, they climbed up to the top of the hill. Then the Torah tells us something fascinating. Moshe Rabbeinu, obviously seeing that he's tired, Aaron and Chur, first of all, placed Moshe Rabbeinu upon a rock, a beautiful midrash about that, as opposed to sitting on a pillow, because he wanted to demonstrate imchem anochi b'tzara, that I am in this with you, that I am suffering just like you are, even though I seem to be safe on top of a hill. At the same time, they held up Moshe Rabbeinu's hands. And what does the Torah tell us? The Torah tells us very clearly, V'haya ka'asher yarim Moshe Yado v'gavar Yisrael. Not when he lifts his mateh. If we pay attention to the text makes it very clear when he lifts his hand. Where's his mateh? Furthermore, v'chasher yaniach yado, when he places down his hand because he was fatigued, because he was exhausted, and he could not hold up his hands, then suddenly v'gavar Amalek. Then Amalek was ahead in this war. Furthermore, just prior to that interesting demonstration, that visual of the Chumash, the Torah tells us, V'dei Moshe Kivedim. Moshe Rabbeinu's hands were tired. At the conclusion of that particular piece, the Torah tells us, Vayhi Yadav, Moshe Rabbeinu's hands. The word Yad is being stressed over and over and over again. His hands were emunah. His hands were straight up. Not his mateh, his hands. Whenever a word is used repeatedly, it becomes a milah mancha. It becomes a guiding word, a light motif of that entire piece, in this case, of the entire parashiyah that relates to us, the episode of Amalek. So to me, the Torah is making it very clear that that Moshe Rabbeinu is telling Yoshua, I'm going to have my mateh in my hand. And I will be standing there in front of, or in sight of, all of Am Yisrael. They will look up to me and they'll see me with my mateh. And then I'm not using my mateh any longer. I'm casting aside my mateh. I'm putting it aside, just as Kliyakar at least explains happened by Yamsuf. Others will disagree. But to me, by Amalek, it's very clear. And Moshe Rabbeinu is raising his hands together with the assistance of Aaron and Chur, and he is no longer holding his mateh. In order for us, Moshe Rabbeinu is conveying to Am Yisrael, to be able to succeed in this milchama, we must fight for ourselves. In direct, sharp contrast to what we find earlier in the Torah, when Moshe Rabbeinu, just before the splitting of the Yam Suf, Moshe Rabbeinu davens, as it were, to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Vayitzak. He cries out to Hashem and says, we've got a problem here. We've got the sea in front of us and we have the Mitzrayim behind us and we are trapped. And my people want to know what's going on. And what does HaKadosh Baruch Hu say? Ma titzak elai. Why are you davening to me? But then he adds, Hashem yilachem lachem. God will fight for you. That was true then, and that was necessary then. But it was also time for the transition. Ma titzak elai. Why are you crying out to me? Daber el b'nei Yisrael, Moshe, you speak to b'nei Yisrael v'yisa'u, and you tell them they must enter the sea. That was the point of the transition. V'yisa'u, you must do so. At the same time, Hashem yilachem lachem. But this Hashem yilachem lachem is not necessarily any longer the case, or it is no longer the only ingredient in seeing towards our success in the milchama. In seeing towards our success in the milchama, that mateh is now cast aside by Moshe Rabbeinu, and it is b'nei Yisrael that must be the ones to engage in the fight in order to ensure our survival. The only other time in the entire Chumash that we find Moshe Rabbeinu using his mateh once again is 40 years later, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu instructs Moshe in the second episode of the hitting of the rock. He instructs Moshe Rabbeinu to talk to the rock, to Moshe and Aharon v'dibartem el hasela, and Moshe makes a fatal error. What that error is subject, of course, to debate. That's a shiur in of itself that I, by the way, have given in the past, that is available in the OU archives. But in any event, Moshe makes some sort of fatal error. It very well may be that he hit the rock instead of speaking to the rock. We'll leave that aside for a different time. But through the rest of Sefer Shemot, through Sefer Vayikra, until we come to Parashat Chukat, towards the end of the last third of Sefer Bamidbar, Moshe Rabbeinu no longer uses his Mateh. His Mateh is no longer a part of the picture. You know what replaced his Mateh? We did. You know what replaced HaKadosh Baruch Hu, demonstrating through Moshe Rabbeinu holding his Mateh, that Hashem yilachim lachem? We did. We became a people that understood that we need to take initiative in order for us to be able to survive, in order for us, in the first place, to even be able to be deserving of this trip and this journey towards Eretz Yisrael, and then, Be'ezrat Hashem, survival in Eretz Yisrael as Am Yisrael. I cannot think of a more important connection between Parashat Shemot, between this journey that we went on this morning of Moshe Rabbeinu and his Mateh, to the times that we are going through now as Am Yisrael today, than this particular discussion of this morning. We are an Am that has been through so much, in so many ways, more than any other peoples on the entire planet. I don't want to say that we are once again at a transition, but rather we are now finding ourselves once again, as we always do, but it is stressed for us even more so today, during this time of war, during this time of milchama, in which we must engage, that we are now along this continuum of, at the same time, of course, Hashem yilachem lachem. Of course, in the tefillah, quoting the Chumash, the tefillah for the welfare of the Chayalim, we recite the pasuk that is used in the Torah in describing a war, in describing a milchama in which we are engaged, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu hanilcham lachem, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the one fighting for us. He is there by our side, just like Moshe Rabbeinu's Mateh. But he cannot do the work for us. We have to be the ones that are proactively engaged in the work, and especially, always, but especially now, in this time of war. Whether it be the Chayalim that are fighting, whether it be all those that are engaged in supporting the Chayalim, whether it be Zaka, whether it be Mada, whatever organizations and individuals, those that are going picking, for example, on the OU trip today, those that are simply cooking for wives, or in some case, husbands that are at home when suddenly a family is simply overwhelmed and cannot simply cook 7 days a week for themselves, and they need extra help, and people are cooking for them, whether it's supporting through tzedakah to different organizations or individuals that need during this time of war, whatever it may be. All of us that are engaged in all of these activities are demonstrating that we understand the message of this transition from Moshe Rabbeinu using his Mateh to Moshe Rabbeinu casting aside his Mateh, and for us to replace this Mateh. In Yirtzeh Hashem, through HaKadosh Baruch Hu, seeing our efforts of becoming that Mateh, seeing our efforts, seeing our proactivity in doing everything, each of us in our own way, everything in our power to ensure the future of Am Yisrael, that we indeed, and this is our tefillah to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and with this we will close our shiur, the last of our chizuk shiurim, at least for me this morning, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will indeed see us through the Netzach Netzachim, that Eretz Yisrael will be ours, and that we will indeed deserve it forevermore. I wish all of you a good day, I wish all of us the best of health. And I wish for all of OUisrael and for the entire world a time when we will, in Yirtzeh Hashem, see shalom and we will see peace. Thank you so much to all of you for attending, and have a wonderful day. Feel free to unmute yourselves if you wish to share anything at this point. And before you do, I just want to thank one of you, Roseanne. Thank you for thanking me for the wonderful class. And yes, Emir Tashem, Hashem will be there for us always. And I look forward to seeing all of you soon again in the OU Center or via another format.
Amazing.
Sorry?
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome. Okay, Shai, yes?
I'm going to miss these chizuk shiurim, but I wish there hadn't been a war and we hadn't had the shiurim. What can you do?
I agree. Obviously, that's not for me to decide. I'm not involved in those decisions. But I can tell you that Rabbi Sam Shor, together with Chana and the rest of his team, are working day in and day out to ensure that we can get back to the Shigra, get back to the normal routine as soon as possible, some of which, of course, is already taking place at OUisrael and in other locations as well. I myself, by the way, had the opportunity, I think I mentioned this last week, to give a shiur for OU in Modi'in, as the OU is indeed expanding its horizons in person as well. So, of course, we all look forward to a time when we will be able to return to the Shigra, to the normal routine. But I assure you that Rabbi Shor and his team are working very, very hard towards that end. Okay?
Rabbi, will your shiurim there be recorded?
Say it again?
Will your shiurim in Modi'in be recorded?
So the shiur that I gave in Modi'in, it was the Kolel Boker of Modi'in, run by a Rabbi Stephen Ettinger, in conjunction with the OU. That shiur was not recorded. The one that I gave was not recorded, and the Kolel Boker program normally is not recorded. If I am there myself, or when I am there myself, at the most, it will be every other week on a Tuesday, every second week at the most, because the OU has several individuals that are going there. Will they be recorded or not? This I do not know. I can ask the next time that I deliver a shiur there, but I can't make any promises because that's beyond my control.
We should ask.
Shai, what is it?
Since I can't be at any other of the places to join you, I don't know, the class, the team is the only way I can do the team or to the Zoom.
Okay. Yeah, Shai, that's a good question. All of my OU classes, whether they are these Zoom sessions or whether they are the sessions in person like I used to give and maybe will again soon, God willing, all of the OU classes, they are all archived. They are all available to watch at a later date. All of them. Okay, the chizuk shiurim for this week, all of them are also Zoom. But after that, they're all available to watch at a later date. You can look it up on YouTube. You can look up the address in OU Tidbits, but it's there, and you can watch all the shiurim. Okay.